And we have the third panel speaker, Prof. Ramli Bahroom, who's from Open University, Malaysia. He has obtained his Bachelor of Economics, Business Administration with honors from University of Malaya in 1976, and Master in Business Administration, Finance with magna cum laude from Catholic University of Leuven, Belgium in 1979. He then served as a lecturer at the Faculty of Economics and Administration and later at the Faculty of Business and Accountancy at the University of Malaya until 2001. He was the first Master of the 11th Residential College, 1997 to 2001, and Deputy Director of the University's Business Development Unit from 1998 to 2000. He has been a consultant for a number of national and international projects such as Johor Port Expansion Plan, costing of crude palm oil, and setting up of business school in Uzbekistan. So these are the three panel speakers. But I'd like to say something on what they will be covering in today. The most important thing in education, especially in the private education, is the cost of education. And recently, even during the recent election, there's a lot of debate about providing education, whether it should be free or not free. But I'd like to share with you what students say about fees. He says all children should be given a free education so that they become useful and productive citizens. It is for the good of the nation that students be educated as they grow, and that this education to be free so that all and hopefully participate later in the workforce and in the economy. But at the same time, there are also students who do not believe in free education. Yes. And he says that we live in a system where the rich get the education to get richer. We should provide the education at a very, very low cost, essentially, making it free to change all this. You should learn from some of the European countries where college education is free and how much benefit each of these countries are having from this. This is again supporting. But also, so this is a feedback online where people are talking about education. So this one says, education is currently freely supplied to all the residents of the US, but higher education is not. I don't think that it should be free because some degrees that people pursue require more or less work than others and yield different results. Also, since it is a person's choice to go to college, it is a responsibility to pay. So let's see how our panel speakers are going to address these issues. And without wasting much time, I think each speaker will give 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll have time for question and answer. So may I invite the first speaker, that is Dato Sri Mashkuri Yaacob, to present. Thank you.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon. Salam satu Malaysia. Thank you very much to our session moderator for the kind introduction. I was surprised that he emphasized a lot on the word free. I don't think I dare talk about the freeness of it, because nothing is free in this world, nothing at all. Anyway, let me first say out whatever that I have in my mind at the moment, and comment on the free matter later. I was more thinking about the quality because, as was introduced earlier, I did some work in rebranding the university where I'm working now to turn around to make the university to show that it can produce quality programs or it can run quality programs. And we already had the session this afternoon after lunch, handled by all the distinguished former vice-chancellors and professors on the aspects of quality. Over tea, I still remember Tan Sri Anwar reminding me to mention that because this is the topic of this particular session, mentioned to me that the only people who get away with offering things with quality and need not worry about costs are the public universities. They get lots of money. They claim to provide quality programs, but the cost that they have to incur to provide all those things don't seem to bother them at all because they have a bottomless pocket. So in this session, we're talking about how to make education free, which is the opposite. And I don't think I can cover that part very well because to me, it's either you trade off quality and you therefore gain a lot in terms of cost, or you trade off the cost and you get quality. The two somehow or other cannot mix. And I don't think definite conclusive answers to all these issues, more so on the issue of getting a definite answer about having a free education. I do not know how the other group of people always wants to talk about free education. Where did they get this philosophy from? I'm totally puzzled. Okay, quality versus cost. The very nature of the two words, quality and cost, means that they cannot possibly cross. It's impossible for the two words to cross. Something has to give. And it depends on your priorities, which one you want to give. If you were to subscribe to the idealism of quality, cost has to be set aside. Meaning you will provide quality at whatever cost. If cost is of greater importance, then it is obvious that quality has to be compromised. And the degree of the compromise, again, depends on how much is the weightage on cost. In my experience, my bosses always reminds me, you have to cut down cost, but at the same time, make sure quality is maintained. Very tough call for anyone. So, in our case, in my experience, in UNITEN, we cannot ever think of making any profit. So, therefore, we forget the cost part. And it's said that I am in a session supposed to be talking about finance, and I know next to zero about finance. Every time I had to look at the figures, I will rely everything on my financial controller all the time. So, if you are true in our commitment to offer quality higher education services, we therefore cannot ever operate a higher education institution with the thought of making profit. I mean, in other words, higher education institution should never be a for-profit. It should be a not-for-profit organization. No offense to our colleagues who have now made good money from higher education. Good for them. But my stand is it should never be for-profit if you adhere to the idealism of quality. So in my case, in UNITEN, the core business for us is to run a very good engineering school. And we are proud to say that we offer engineering programs, and this is a statement which I always make publicly. We offer engineering programs recognized by the professional bodies of the United Kingdom, the only university in this country that can boast of that recognition. And that clearly is expensive to maintain, because the standard set by the Western world is really very high. So it is an expensive business for us. And at the same time, since it is also the topic of this session, we also have to make sure that the fees are affordable. So we are offering a world-class engineering program at a Malaysian affordable price. So the way we put it, we say, we're offering you a world-class engineering program recognized by the United Kingdom at 1/5 of the price of what you will have to pay if you were to go to the United Kingdom. So that's the only we can sort of soften it, because there's no way we can reduce it such that it becomes too cheap beyond what we can even take. You know, we can't what do you call shoulder. For example, engineering, the investment in the laboratories, maintaining a very small class size so that you get very good staff-student interaction and contact hours. At the same time, we also need to have highly qualified lecturers at the PhD level. They also being well-grounded and experienced engineers from industry. And at the same time, we make sure also the students are given excellent, relevant content and very good mode of delivery. We have not tried e-learning yet, but I think maybe we should explore that too, to cut down our cost. And at the same time, we have a very strict engineering accreditation council that will only give accreditation for only a short period of 2 to 3 years. And each time we have to spend money to improve ourselves so that we can get renewed. So all this is very, very expensive, and it's not cheap. So that brings me to the next issue as an example. How can we operationalize the offering of the world-class engineering education services at the tertiary level, affordable to the Malaysian mass of very ambitious school levels? That is something which I don't think I have any answer. What more if you were to ask us to offer it for free? We're still, no way at all. No way at all. So my experience is very simple. We run other programs to make up for the loss. So we offer business and accounting where we can get more money there, and it's cheaper to run because the staff-student ratio requirement is less. There are no laboratories. The Malays would say it's just ILEO, ILEO. It's cheaper. So we use those programs to prop up the cost of having to actually offer the expensive engineering program. That was the corporate social responsibility to the country by TMB, and it is still the contribution by TMB. In the same vein, when it comes to the affordable part, where we talk about trying to get some funds to cover for the fees offered, the facilities offered to the students to cover the tuition fees, we have PTPTN. I saw a few reps from PTPTN today, and in my view, PTPTN is also a social contribution by the government. Say what you may, because I was talking to one of the bosses of PTPTN who has now left, Cik Yunus. He was telling me, this is one business where you can guarantee to get a loss. Because we have a sizable group of graduates who actually borrowing from PTPTN, who had to be chased all the time to get them to pay back the loans. And this is an ongoing effort by PTPTN until they die, sort of. So PTPTN is a social contribution by the government and is always running at a loss. So again, I don't know how one group can even think of abolishing PTPTN. But to say that it is debt for life is being unfair to PTPTN. Because those who took PTPTN loans can choose to pay back slowly in small installments over a very long period, after which time, maybe 10, 15 years, they would have risen in their career to actually be able to more than afford to pay back. By that time, it will be peanuts to pay back 200 ringgit when they probably will be earning 10, 15,000. So we should thank PTPN for providing the facilities and thank the universities for offering quality programs at affordable fees, not free. Not free. In fact, for PTPTN, those who did well need not pay at all. So there is therefore the incentive for you to take the loan and work hard to do well and need not pay. And in that sense, it is free. It is free. Maybe in that sense, you can translate it to be free. There's some cash there. At least I can think of it as being free. So if you want to get something free, work hard. Then you get it for free. For free. Therefore, in that light, higher education is certainly an investment. It cannot be seen in any other way. So those who do not take the opportunity to make it as a useful time while they were in university to invest in a career providing good opportunity will only regret. Even if it is not for a promising career growth, the period in the university are good moments to acquire knowledge, skills to interact, learn more about other people and many other attributes useful for their future life. And we have heard throughout the day that the higher education landscape in Malaysia now is such that there is affordable and broader access to opportunities in enriching ourselves on various wealth of new knowledge. And quality now is being monitored by the MQA, very well established organization. We have regular audits being conducted. In fact, even it was mentioned just now, Prof. Dato even listed out all the details of the rating and ranking, including the QS, the Setara, the Myra, and the MyQuest, and whatever, you know. So it's all set and well established. Of course, there are still small little problems here and there, but on the whole, it is an accepted system to actually assess the quality and standards of our private and public universities. So what is left for all those running all this is to find ways to sustain this high quality and keep the cost affordable where possible. Every one of us has a duty to offer the experience, memorable and exciting, to the students without having them to worry that they do not have to pay debts for life. With that, I thank you again for your time to listen to me. Thank you very much.
So that was the first panel speaker. So he was talking about quality and cost. And he also said that higher education should not be for profit. So later, if you have any questions, you can put forward, or the other panel who want to address that, they could. But to keep the cost low, you mentioned that they have diversified into other courses like engineering expensive. They diversified other courses to keep the average cost low. And while talking about PTP10, he addressed correctly that PTP10 loan is available. You want free education? Yes, you can. Yeah. So it's affordable. It can be free. It's up to the student. Yeah, that's what he has made his statement. So now I invite the next panel speaker, Mr. UK Menon, to present.
Thank you, Elin. And I must also thank the organizers for extending an invitation to me to make this presentation here today. I was caught by a little surprise when I learned, and I didn't choose this particular topic, but I was given this, that I'm supposed to talk on University for All, making international quality education affordable. I thought these issues were beyond debate, that to ask for an affordable education was obvious. To say that all education should be free is even more obvious. I'll come back to that. I grew up at a time in the 50s, and this is when I started my school in a place called Pasar Road, which has recently been demolished completely. All the old government houses, one of which I stayed in, have all been moved. But Pasar Road School was a school that straddled two different types of communities. On the one side was the government servants' houses. These were the original link houses. And on the other side was a large squatter area. And adjoining the squatter was a kampong, which is not there. The squatter area is no longer there, nor the government houses, as I said, in which my parents was a tenant, and therefore I lived there. In my classroom, and in my class there were 40 students, and I remember when we finished in standard 6, we knew each one of them by name, obviously. I mean, that's not a big revelation. But we maintained connection with each other for many, many years. We had old boys gathering first in the secondary school after primary school, and then later on when we were in different places of learning, and then when we returned in this country, and even as recently as 2 months ago, we met this group of people. And the one thing that always impresses me and moves me is this, that almost all 40 students in that class had transformed their life from what they were to what they had become. And that transformation, we were all from, if we were government servants' children, we were just middle class or just living in families that were able to make ends meet. And if you were, and your classmates were from the squatter areas, and they were poor. I remember once one of my classmates' mother had come to my house to see whether she could wash clothes for my mother. And I almost fainted when I saw this. I said, my goodness, I have to see that one of my friends' mothers should come and work in my house, and it never happened. But so actually we lived on this verge of poverty, and we experienced it. We're not poor. I mean, we had decent meals. We had the 10 cents to take to school. But all our lives were transformed by that experience in education, that primary school education, and then later into secondary education. We never had to contemplate paying fees. Some money had to be given. I think I remember in the early days, it was 2 ringgit 50 cents for a year or something that you had to pay for your school. The power of education is its capacity its power to convert people, convert communities, change the whole face of a nation if possible. And that brings me to the discussion about this affordable education. And I think we've been blessed in this country about having higher education in the last 20 years at least to be very affordable. And affordable largely because of the intervention of the private sector, or the innovations of the private sector, I should say. That the many private colleges that sprung up and came into being in the last 20 or 25 years, in fact, ensured that there was education at the university level, and that education was brought into this country from outside the country only through the efforts of these private colleges. And the fees were very, very reasonable. From 1996, as we all know, we could actually do all 3 years of a foreign university program in Malaysia, in a private college, at a cost that was affordable. The last speaker said that his fees are 1/5 the fees paid in England in a university for a similar program. And that's the level at which we were saying we could send 5 children for a full university education with the price for one that you would have to spend had you gone overseas. So this idea about education as being a commodity, at least in this area, I will refuse this commodification or the commoditization of education to this extent, that it cannot be a commodity of need, it must be given. If it is a commodity, then it must be something that is given. If it is like providing shelter, providing free medical care, providing food for those who can't afford to obtain their own food. Education must be an essential. In law, which is my discipline, we call it a necessary, not a necessity, but in the legal term we say it's a necessary, that education is something that you need to obtain. The other reason why you need to look at education and the cost of education differently is because there isn't a level measure that is applicable across the different types of institutions. You have public institutions in this country, and then you have public institutions that run as private institutions in this country, and then you have institutions that are described generally as private, but they have different models. The previous speaker comes from UNITEN. He is from a university that is established by what I call a utility company. These utility universities have their own funding outside the fee funding, and that's how you are able to establish a university of that caliber, of that distinction, of the kind of facilities. I remember someone from Liverpool went and looked at your university's equipment and came back, salivating, saying that it's not the kind of equipment that he would have seen in his university. So the cost of education, when we say that, oh, we can't make education free, we're not looking closely enough. The equality of fees, even if it is charged, doesn't exist. It's always discriminate. It's always a position in which there is discrimination. That no person who has to pay fees pays the right amount for the education. There's always some form of unseen compensation, some form of additional payments that you don't see. So this is an imaginary thing to say, oh, education cannot be free. Of course it can be free. There was a research done in the UK about 5 years ago, and they looked at the efficiency of the public sector universities against private sector universities. And in one area, and I won't go into the other areas, in one area in the business courses, the public universities spend 15,000 ringgit at the lower end for a single student per year. Now, in the private university, the total cost per student for a business program was 7,000, less than half the cost that was expanded in the private sector university. Now, the conclusion of the UKM researchers was this, they said, see, because you're spending only 7,500, whereas the public university spend 15,000, your education cannot be as good as the education that is given in the public universities, which I thought was a remarkably naive conclusion. But still, leaving that issue aside, if you're looking at cost of education, the affordability of education, paying fees, is this fair that you have an imposition of 15,000 in one sector and the imposition of 7,000 on the other? So fees, apart from being, at least for education, apart from denying access, also creates inequalities within the structure. And that is why I think it is important that we took away the fee factor. The fees, the economics of educational funding has got all kinds of crevices and dark corners, and it'll never ever give you a true picture of the true cost of education. Education has to be free. That doesn't mean that you can't have private sector doing, private institutions doing education. That doesn't mean that you can't have institutions teaching or providing education and making a profit out of it. All I'm saying is that the actual beneficiary of the education, the student, should not have to pay for it, for the fees. And the student should not have to bear the burden for the fees by taking a loan. The parents of the students don't have to pay for the fees unless, of course, that parent pays through the tax system. So the tax system very often levels these differentials in the community and would pay for the education. But it is important that education is maintained free, because if you want to transform this community, if you want to transform any community, you need to give them education. And, very often we are looked at from the outside. Western analysis of Malaysia is that they will look at our educational level by asking whether we are a literate nation. Literacy is the yardstick of our educational level. Oh, yes, they can read and they can write. I think that we need to go beyond that. Literacy is not what we're looking for. We've already established 100% literacy in this country. What we're looking for is people who are highly educated. And if that means people who have gone through higher education, that should be adequate. That everyone in this country should have education beyond the school. Now, that doesn't mean that you must get everyone into a university and put them through these degree programs simply because everyone feels that you must have a degree after university. I'm simply saying that you need to move everyone to the highest level of education that he's capable of taking. I was looking at the statistics, and if you look at the cohort group of people who are ripe for tertiary education in this region, Malaysia is one of the smaller countries in terms of numbers. In Indonesia, the cohort size in 2011 was 20 million. One country, 20 million. Imagine 20 million 5 years later if they are given education. 20 million is about, say, 10% of the total population, or maybe less than 10% of the total population. Can you imagine a transformation of that percentage of people within a period of 5 years? Do you wait to see whether they can afford the education? You can't. You must not wait for that. You must make sure that they have that education, because the transformation is almost assured. And if you don't have that, and if you say that this is, user pay, some mad World Bank idea that came about in the early 90s, some idea that sprung from people who believed that the user must pay for services because the government cannot afford it, really fails to understand the economics of nations. So if you have education at the highest level available for every individual in the country will transform. This country will transform. A country with 20 million size cohort population will transform. The cohort size in China is 120 million. They too will transform. And the thing is, you can't wait to see whether everyone else will transform before we take this decision. We have to make our decisions for our people in this country, that higher education will not simply be affordable, that it'll be free. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Menon. I think he generally spoke that again, he says education is affordable and it's a commodity that should be given. And he also made a difference between funding by a private institution and a GLC university like UNITEN. And also, finally, he said that education should be made free. Okay, correct? Yeah. And those are his ideas. Yeah, that's what he says. And now I'll go to the third panel speaker. It's all yours, please.
Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Prof. Elajsolan, my esteemed fellow panelists, members of the audience, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this conference for giving me this golden opportunity to speak on this panel. To be honest, I'm a little overawed because I have two CEOs on this panel, and I'm not one of them. In fact, yang berbahagia, Dato Seri Professor Mashkuri was my former boss at University of Malaya. However, just to build my confidence, I deal with money every day for Open University. And at the same time, I come from an institution where affordability is our institution's, is one of the words in our institution's mission statement. In fact, we strive for affordability. So I guess I'm not completely an outlier on this subject matter. Now, since I was given 10 or maybe 10 to 15 minutes, I know it's getting late. I try to be as short as possible. These slides are just to highlight the points which I may not express clearly in my presentation. I'll be touching on three points: cost, revenue, or fees, and quality. No, I will not, just like my predecessors, especially Dato Mashkuri, Dato Seri Mashkuri, I will not be touching on free education. But we can discuss this later, right? But I will be concentrating on affordability, because I think that is very important from our standpoint. Now, let's go to the cost. The first item. Since I come from the background of finance, I will discuss the issue of affordability from a very simple financial approach, and that is affordability means low fees. Low fees will lead to affordability, and of course, how do you get low fees? It has to come from low cost. So if you want to provide affordable programs or education to the people, then the institution should strive to lower its costs. This is true not only for private education, but also for private higher education institutions, but also for the public institutions. Now, one of the things, of course, it's very easy to say to lower costs. How do we do that? That is not that simple. However, there are some basic principles, basic tenets that we can use to guide our institutions to lower our cost. One of them is, of course, to reduce wastage. There are lots of wastage, and I'll talk about that later. But the other one which was mentioned by the previous speaker, Professor Kang from MMU. He was talking about technology. To me, and that is what is being practiced at Open University in Malaysia, we leverage heavily on technology. In fact, I believe in today's higher education, technology is no longer an option. The previous speaker, Mr. Menon, mentioned that the average private fee for private education per year is 7,000. Mr. Menon, the fees for our university is even lower. It's only about around 5,000 per year. Well, of course, part of it is, we believe is due to technology. In fact, technology can reduce costs. However, there is a bad news and the good news and the bad news to this. The good news is, when you use technology, the infrastructure must be good. And in Malaysia today, alhamdulillah, we thank God, because the government has made significant progress in increasing the bandwidth, the internet penetration, and so forth, so on and so forth. There is a specific policy actually on technology for this country, and this has helped us to advance the use of technology for our institutions. However, there is also the bad news, and the bad news is the digital divide. I think we all are fully aware of the digital divide, not only between urban and rural areas. It is also between the rich and the poor, as well as even between the states. In fact, I have some statistics here. Kuala Lumpur, of course, we all know that, it has the highest broadband penetration of 100 households. Per 100 household, 123% broadband penetration, compared to, say, Sabah, only 25.6%. Now, this is an issue, this is a problem, so narrowing digital gap remains a big challenge for the country. Now, apart from lowering costs by using technology, we can also share technology resources, and I think this is the part which is somewhat lacking in our institutions. I'm very happy to see Professor Kang presenting. MMU, we know it is a technology institution, and they have advanced very far ahead in terms of leveraging on technology. But there are other institutions in this country which have yet to intensify the use of technology in their institutions. And I think this is bad news, because if you don't share, to me, you will lose in terms of cost, especially when we talk about affordability. Because we should be able to reduce costs if we share the resources, technological resources. You know, we started a project in Saudi Arabia a couple of years back, where we helped Saudi Arabian government under the Ministry of Higher Education Saudi Arabia. We helped develop National E-Learning Center for Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, e-learning is centralized. All resources are centralized. The National E-Learning Center and all universities subscribe and use the platform developed by the National E-Learning Center. Now, unfortunately, well, maybe this is because of history, in this country, every university has its own, practically every university has its own e-learning platform. Now, to me, if we can share the platform, especially for the newer universities, I think we can reduce costs substantially, and this can contribute significantly to affordability. This is the bad news and the good news I was talking about earlier. I missed the slide. And now, of course, there are also challenges with respect to the use of technology. Basically, are learners comfortable with online learning or e-learning? I think for the current batch of learners, the so-called digital natives, I think this is no problem at all. But for us at Open University Malaysia, we do have some problem, because our students are basically working adults. Some of them are still not very comfortable with technology. So we have, for higher education institutions, we need to balance between investment in ICT and the learning outcomes. I think this was mentioned much earlier in one of the sessions. And that is the other thing about technology that we have to think about. I think earlier the previous speaker, Prof. Kang, also mentioned about technology is just an enabler, right? as educationists, I think we believe in that very strongly. Now, the sharing of resources, that was what I was talking about earlier. Now, the next point I will go into is the fees. Because when we talk, on the other side of the cost is the revenues or the fees, right? The cost can be low, but still some HEIs or higher education institutions can charge very high fees. Well, some may argue that if an institution charges a high fee, it will be priced out of the market, but this is just market theory, which is true only when the market is perfect or when there is perfect information. Unfortunately, in reality, I was surprised to find that there are some huge discrepancy in fees, even for similar programs. And a couple of years ago, I attended a meeting in Putrajaya. There were all these providers of programs, and it was in the nursing and allied health program. And I was shocked to learn that the nursing program can cost between 25,000 to over 50,000. It's basically the same program. Unfortunately, one is in Kuala Lumpur, the higher one was in Kuala Lumpur, the lower one was in Kelantan. Well, it can be due to geographical location, but to imagine, to have such a huge discrepancy in fees is unthinkable. And of course, if you have very high fees, funding on the part of funding burden will be very big for the students. And imagine the nurses, when they come out of that program, they have to pay back 50,000 PTPTN plus other service charges, whatever it is. It may come up to about 70,000 to be paid, and how much is the salary of, say, a fresh nursing graduate? So that is an issue. I think in this case, someone must do something. I think maybe this is a bit outdated in that sense because this was a few years ago. Maybe now things have changed, right? But this should be prevented from recurring in the future. Now, we talk about profit motives. I think Bagi Dato mentioned that, educational institution shouldn't be profit motivated, right? So I think I agree, Dato. In fact, I come from a private institution, even though it's owned by the government, and I also do not believe that education institutions should be profit maximizers. You can make surpluses. Surpluses are acceptable, right? Why? Because surpluses need to be reinvested to enhance quality of services to our learners. Thank God, Open University, we have accumulated some surpluses over the years, and we have managed to build up very nice centers all over the country to provide high quality services to our learners. So a lot of people, Tan Si especially, always told me when he meet people, he say, "Oh, OUM has a lot of money." No, we did make some surpluses, but a lot of them, if you look at our accounts, and our accounts are published annually. We have to publish our annual account in our annual report annually. You can see we reinvest whatever that we accumulate in terms of surpluses back to the learners in terms of better quality services, right? So to me, you can make surpluses, you can make some profit, but to maximize profit in the true sense of the word, in the economic sense, maximizing shareholders' wealth, to me, is not acceptable. Finally, I will talk about quality. There are many ingredients that make up quality education. And I think one of them was mentioned by my president this morning, university of choice. To me, whatever you do, you can engage in high-profile research to enhance your image. You can engage, you can leverage on technology to improve your services. But at the end of the day, is your university a university of choice? I think Tan Si was trying to explain this morning. If you look at the present situation, the present the situation in our country, those who can afford expensive education, they will send their students to which university, locally or overseas? If local universities are universities of choice, then not only the rich parents but also the scholarship sponsors, the rich scholarship sponsors, Petronas, Mara, whatever, who wants high quality education, should send their students to local universities. Then you can say that we have achieved a very high quality level of a university of choice. At the moment, unfortunately, maybe we are going towards that. Maybe in the next few years we'll do that. But currently, we are not. But for Open University Malaysia, if I may add, we would like to be a university of choice for working people. Right? Now, another aspect of quality is, of course, learner-centeredness. And this is another thing that we at OUM also propagates, and that is we put the student first. The student can have access right to the Vice-Chancellor through emails and so on. And of course, if he writes to the Vice-Chancellor, everybody else, will be on their toes. Right? And in everything we do, we always focus on the students. In fact, research at Open University is different. I mean, we have a couple of academic staff here. You can ask them. They can verify this. Research at Open University Malaysia, we do not allow disciplinary research. We encourage institutional research so that you conduct research on the university on how to improve the quality of our services to our students. And that is how committed are we in terms of learner-centeredness. And I think finally, you talk about adopting flexible learning. We know that learning styles are changing. And therefore, current students, especially the working adults, even the younger ones now, are preferring maximum learning flexibility. I think students now do not like to be constrained by a certain fixed schedule of classes and so on. They would like to, and that's why, especially with the advent of the mobile devices, iPads, iPhones, and so on, smartphones, and this have somewhat enhanced the use of, enhanced the flexibility in the delivery of. In fact, we at Open University are seeking to do this. So inflexibility is a serious limitation in broadening access to higher education. What I'm trying to say here, if you do not change your delivery mode, if you do not try to be as flexible as possible to meet the needs of your students, then I feel sorry for you, because you will be left behind. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Chairman, that is my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof. Ramli. He also spoke on affordability, and he says how to keep the operational cost low is by minimizing wastage or maybe optimum use of resources, and also to leverage on technology to cut down the cost. He also spoke about the affordability within rural and urban population. And finally, he said about profit. He said you can make profit, yeah, but then it should not be maximized, yeah, because we need money to reinvest, yeah. Otherwise, then it is not possible to run an educational institution. So before I open up for questions, I think maybe another 5-10 minutes before I open up for questions. I also like to put forward some views. Now, there is a great disparity between what is affordable and what is not affordable, because the fees charged also varies. Like for engineering, one of the foreign branch campuses charges about 160 to 180,000 for a 4-year program, and they say it's affordable. Because they say affordable because we do in UK, it will cost you 4 times. But at the same time, another IPTS also doing engineering, they charge half the cost, and they say it's affordable. So how do you define what is affordable? And end of the day, when you talk to the public, anywhere you go to the public, they say private colleges are expensive. Why? Because I think they are comparing with the public universities. But they fail to understand that the public universities, they all are subsidized. It's the taxpayers' money that has gone in, and they pay a nominal fee that also may not be able to cover operations. Because today, what I was told is that at public university, the operation cost an established public university, the operation cost per year could be about 1 billion. Yeah? And leave alone the capital expenditure, investment. Yeah? So again, the question is whether it's affordable or not affordable is a question. And general, the public still feels that education is very expensive and it should be reduced. If any of the panel can comment on that before I open up to other questions. Mr. Menon, you're in the private sector, you should be able to answer that question.
Yeah, again, as I said, it's you can't approach this issue about education by using commercial measures. The moment you begin to talk about for-profit and not for-profit, you distort the issue. The fundamental issue really is this: the funding of education you need to look at very closely. Who funds it? Where do the funds come from education? I think to say that it is private and therefore it is money that is expended by the individual who pays for it, and that if it is government who's going to support it, are too simple analysis that are too simple to get you to the true point of educational funding. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether you have for-profit or not-for-profit institutions, whether you have government institutions or non-government institutions. The important thing is to ask whether the person who is going to be the beneficiary of education, that is the student, has to pay for it, or whether he has to pay for the education through a loan or through his own financial resources in the family. My position is very simple. Education cannot be commoditized to this extent that it becomes a tradable item in the market. It must be made freely available to everyone who needs it, and everyone must be encouraged to take higher education. This is, as I said, it's as important as building your roads, clearing your forests, and raising the economy.
Yeah, thank you. I think the question posed by Mr. Chairman is a very relevant one. I would like to share my views on this. Talking about funding for education, I think we have to be very careful about this, because we have to look at it, as Mr. Menon just mentioned, from institutional or from the national perspective. Of course, if you compare a private higher institution, education institution against a public higher education institution, of course, if you look at the fees of the public institution is going to be 10% less, 10% of the, and that is because the government, at least, now maybe less. Last time they used to subsidize 90% of the cost of education of a public university. The operating cost of a public university is 1 billion ringgit a year on the average. Some will be more, some will be less. I think if you look at some big ones like Apex University, maybe more, 1.2 billion, right? And these are whose money? It's taxpayers' money. Remember. So when you talk about the cost of education, you should not look at it face value. You should look at it at what is the true cost. My Tan Sri Anwar Ali always asks me this: what do you think of the cost of per student of for public university? Because every year for Open University we present a report to the board of directors, who happens to be the VCs of the public universities. We are owned by the 11 public universities, and that's our holding company, Meteor. And every year I present, every quarter we present a report to the board of directors, to the VCs of the public universities, and we give them a cost per student for them to know. So I can tell you just now the price, the fees, and so on, right? But what is the true cost per student for a public university? Now this is we spend. That is why, to me, if you want to talk about affordability, we should look at the true cost. There shouldn't be any wastage. There shouldn't be any venture that leads to high cost, even high opportunity cost. Now, we are worried at the moment because some universities are not focused in their venture. I'm not talking about the public university, not focused. They do so many things, sometimes out of the core business. And this, to me, entails a very high opportunity cost, which we should really look at. So, to me, by the way, when I made my comparison just now between the 50,000 and the 25,000, both are private universities. The fact is, one is in KL, one is in. So I'm comparing private to private. Thank you.
I just make one more point, Chairman. This you see, there is this issue of equity, the issue of equality, and there's also this issue about what is education all about. I think we're missing some important points here. You see, the moment if you make education into a tradable commodity, as I said, then you're going to decimate part of the educational content. I was in Australia for a large part of my professional life. You know, language schools closed down, philosophy went off, history was losing ground. Many of the other departments had to struggle to find students. So what do? They associated with business and with IT in order to get the students. Why? Because everything was measured by the number of students and the cost, or rather the amount of fees that was paid by students. You can't have education built on the whims of a current fad. You must provide to the community always that standard content of education so that there would be a balance between those who would study the sciences, those who would do the basic sciences, those who would do the applied sciences, those who would go for philosophy, those who would go for law, those who would go for medicine. What we are now looking at is we are creating a very, very bizarre society, one that is educated according to the value of the program. Our hierarchies, our prejudices, our vanities are built on this. So it's not just good enough to say my daughter is doing hospitality management. I must say that she's doing medicine at Johns Hopkins. No, Johns Hopkins University, because then I would add prestige to my family. I would add prestige to the name of my family. I would bring my daughter into a new social realm which will not be habited by people lesser than Johns Hopkins. I think this is absolute rubbish, and this is what we've allowed education to. This is where we've allowed education to lead us at the moment. And it all stems from the fact that we look at education in the same way as we look at fashions. And we look at it in the same way and the same costing processes as we look at other commodities. We should stop doing that. We should provide education equally to everyone. Your present system is not fair. It is absolutely not fair. As you said, the Kelantanis who is paying the fees, the fees in Kelantan, does he or she get the same kind of education that the person who pays for education in Kuala Lumpur gets? So we really have to look at this. I mean, this idea of affordable education and whether or not the person who is the student should pay the fees are, as far as I'm concerned, debates that should not be entertained.
Like to comment? Okay. Any questions from the floor? From the audience? It's all eager to go back. I think it's a long day today. Yeah. In summarizing, I think all my other speakers presented well. But for the benefit of all those who are present here, NAPEI as an association, we have sent memorandum to the Ministry of Finance on how to keep the cost low. And one of the areas where we have said is that private universities or colleges be given interest-free loan so that we could pass the saving to the students. That means the student enrolling, his cost will be lower, because in private education, the cost of investment is very, very high. So if there's some soft loans made available, then it will be saving, which can be, the saving could be passed on to the students. We have sent in. And also the recent issue about EMGS is a big issue. We have sent memorandum to the Ministry of Finance. If at all EMGS is going to carry on, then the fees, there should not be any fees charged. It should be free service, because based on ETP, the total revenue from the private sector education is to reach 64 billion by the year 2020, and that is a great income to the nation. So these services should be given for free. Because when we spoke to MIDA, they had a similar service for expatriates coming in. They never charged any fees for that. So we have sent this for the 2014 budget. Hope we get some good news on that. With that, please put your hands together to thank our speakers. And I'd like to pass on to the organizers. Thank you.
Just to thank again the Mr. Professor Mohan, the moderator, Dato Seri, Mashkuri, UNITEN's VC, Mr. Menon, and Prof. Ramli. As a token of appreciation, as usual, we'd like to give a small gift from the organizer.